Within a foreboding and ominous castle, the Demon Lord prepares to launch his grand campaign to conquer the world. To bring his plan to fruition, he calls forth his 4 demonic generals. First comes Almindra the Inferno, a blazing force of destruction. Then, Sylpha the Storm, the master of tempests. Next, Gnome the Earthen Bastion, an immovable force of nature. And finally, he summons the most jaded and empty-hearted of them all, an underpaid Japanese salaryman. Danaski began his corporate journey as a lowly salaryman, brimming with optimism, certain that through diligence and dedication, he would ascend the corporate hierarchy. However, while Danaski toiled earnestly for the company's success, his co-workers had a different strategy, schmoozing their superiors. Naturally, those who buttered up the boss landed promotions, while Danaski was unceremoniously assigned to a foreign branch to oversee its expansion. Upon arrival, he discovered that the entire project was at a standstill due to a complete lack of funding. Recognizing the problem, Danaski pleaded with his boss to approve additional funds to purchase the necessary tools and materials. But since that would require actually spending money, his boss outright refused and berated him for even suggesting such a wasteful idea. The local workers, unwilling to put in effort without proper equipment, abandoned the project. This left Danaski to shoulder all responsibilities alone. However, as they witnessed his relentless work ethic despite his isolation, the locals found themselves inspired. Gradually, they returned to assist him, and together, they brought the site to life. Just when it seemed his perseverance would finally be acknowledged, Danaski received a call from his boss. At first, he believed his hard work had finally paid off, and that he was about to be rewarded with a well-deserved bonus. He couldn't have been more wrong. There was no grand recognition, no raise, and not even the insult of a cheap pizza party. Instead, his reward for unwavering dedication was an even greater workload, as management decided to ship him off to yet another country for another expansion project. By this point, Danaski was beginning to seriously reevaluate his life choices. Lost in an existential crisis, he failed to notice his surroundings until it was too late. Before he could react, he found himself on the receiving end of a high-speed collision with none other than Moped Kuin. And that, more or less, explains how he ended up here. Even so, Danaski is fairly certain that some kind of cosmic clerical error has taken place, because there's no conceivable way the Demon Lord intentionally summoned someone like him. However, the Demon Lord addresses him by name, making it clear that there has been no mistake. Danask has been summoned for a specific purpose. The Demon Lord declares that he has brought him here to serve as his new overseas manager. He has received extensive reports detailing all of Danask's hard work. He knows how Danask was stationed at a foreign branch, adapted to the local language, earned the trust of the locals, and successfully got the operation running despite countless obstacles. For these reasons, the Demon Lord believes that Danask is the ideal candidate to become one of his 4 elite generals. For the first time in his life, Danask feels genuinely acknowledged for his efforts. No one has ever recognized all the blood, sweat, and tears he's poured into his work before. That being said, he finds himself hesitating. Accepting the position of Demon General would, technically speaking, mean betraying humanity, a rather significant moral dilemma. However, the Demon Lord then casually mentions that the position comes with full worker benefits. Suddenly, betraying humanity doesn't seem like such a terrible idea. As if that wasn't tempting enough, the Demon Lord also makes it clear that he actually respects workers' rights. Danask won't be forced into the position against his will. If he doesn't want the job, he is free to decline. The more Danask thinks about it, the more appealing the offer becomes. Compared to how he was treated like disposable garbage at his old company, this opportunity seems almost too good to be true. Still, despite how much he wants to say yes, he hesitates. Deep down, he doesn't believe someone like him deserves such an important role. He was always nothing more than a corporate cog, an expendable worker no one cared about. What right does trash like him have to stand among the Demon Lord's elite? Just as he is about to refuse the offer, the Demon Lord suddenly yells, cutting him off. He refuses to let Danask's past treatment dictate his sense of self-worth. His former company was run by self-serving, incompetent managers who only looked out for themselves. They never bothered to see or acknowledge all the effort he put in behind the scenes. But the Demon Lord is different. He recognizes Danask's value. He understands just how crucial an employee like him can be. So now, Danask must decide, will he return to his old company and be treated like trash all over again? Or will he stay and help build the demon army into something great? Even with all that said, Danask remains hesitant to accept. But before he can think too hard about it, Alminder steps forward and loudly objects to the very idea of allowing a weak human into the demon army. Sylphid and Gnome quickly join in, voicing their agreement. From their perspective, Danask is completely useless. They can't see how someone like him could possibly contribute anything to the demon army. The Demon Lord understands their skepticism, so he decides to settle the matter with a test. Danask will prove his worth. Danask immediately starts panicking. He desperately tries to explain that he has no special powers and is completely incapable of fighting. But before Danask can process what's happening, it's already too late. Alminder has decided to test him with a full force attack, determined to see if he has any hidden potential. She's heard that otherworldly humans sometimes possess extraordinary abilities, so she confidently tells Danask to block her devastating kick. However, just as her foot is about to connect, the Demon Lord suddenly steps in and intercepts the blow. Shocked, Alminder demands to know why he interrupted her. The Demon Lord simply sighs and points out that she didn't even wait for him to finish speaking before jumping to conclusions. Because of that, she completely misunderstood the situation. He gestures toward poor Danask, who is currently sprawled out on the floor, unconscious. The sheer shock of what just happened scared him so badly that he passed out on the spot. The others are taken aback. Alminder wasn't even going all out, yet Danask still fainted from nothing more than the pressure of the attack. This only reinforces their belief that he's just a completely ordinary human. The Demon Lord confirms their suspicions. Danask truly is just a regular human. This revelation only makes his generals object even more strongly. The demon army is composed entirely of monstrous beings, creatures of immense strength and power. If a fragile human like Danask were to get caught up in the constant clashes between demons and demi-humans, he would be torn apart in an instant. He wouldn't last a day. The Demon Lord acknowledges their concerns, admitting that there is indeed ongoing tension between the different factions of his army. However, that is precisely why he needs Danask and his expertise. He isn't looking for someone with an unbreakable body or overwhelming combat prowess. What he needs is someone with the intelligence and adaptability to navigate the chaos. What he expects from Danask isn't brute strength, but resourcefulness. Just then, Danask finally regains consciousness, only to immediately launch into a desperate plea for them to let him go. There's absolutely no way he can handle attacks like the one Alminder just attempted to hit him with. He's not built for this kind of life. The Demon Lord, however, remains completely unfazed. He calmly tells Danask to relax, assuring him that he won't be expected to fight. That said, he does have a suitable test in mind for him. He goes on to explain that the demon army is currently working on forming alliances with the surrounding tribes. So far, they've successfully reached agreements with both the salamanders and the werewolves. However, negotiations with the Minotaur tribe have proven to be particularly challenging. And so, Danask's task will be to do whatever it takes to secure a pact with the Minotaurs. Given Danask's outstanding negotiation skills, it should be a straightforward task to win the Minotaurs' trust and establish a mutually beneficial agreement. However, Danask sees absolutely nothing simple about trying to negotiate with a tribe of massive, battle-hardened Minotaurs. Even so, the Demon Lord has complete faith that he can pull it off. To wrap things up, he tells Danask that if he has any questions, he should ask Almander. Shortly after, Almander begins leading Danask down the hall to where the meeting will take place. Though she follows the Demon Lord's orders without question, she still believes this is a complete waste of time. There's no way a mere human like Danask could successfully negotiate with Minotaurs. Danask honestly agrees with her. He's convinced he's far too useless for this kind of responsibility. But at the same time, the Demon Lord's words seemed so genuine when he spoke about how much he needed him. No matter how impossible it may seem, he wants to meet the Demon Lord's expectations. Before he has any more time to dwell on his self-doubt, Almander suddenly stops and announces that they've arrived. She gestures to the massive doors in front of them and explains that this is the meeting room where the Minotaur chief is waiting. Danask is momentarily taken aback by the sheer size of the room, but Almander dismisses his surprise. It's only natural. The Minotaurs are enormous creatures, so of course, their accommodations have to match. As a final warning, she informs him that Minotaurs are known to be incredibly ferocious. If he isn't careful, he might end up getting trampled to death before he even gets a chance to speak. With that said, Almander pushes the doors open, revealing the room beyond. Danask has no idea what to expect from the Minotaur chief, but he's determined to do his best to negotiate, no matter what. However, the moment he actually lays eyes on the Minotaur chief, all of that determination immediately flies out the window, because he completely freaks out. There's absolutely no way Danask could negotiate with someone like Terius without instantly dropping dead. The sheer presence of the Minotaur chief alone is enough to make his knees weak. Seeing his distress, Almander actually starts to feel bad for him. In an uncharacteristic act of kindness, she offers to assist him with the negotiations, and Danask, overwhelmed with gratitude, eagerly accepts. However, his relief is short-lived. He watches in horror as Almander immediately starts butting heads with Terius, and it quickly becomes clear that things aren't exactly going smoothly. Almander just can't wrap her head around why Terius is so dissatisfied with everything they've provided for him. Meanwhile, Terius keeps insisting that she doesn't understand what he's saying. This frustrating back and forth continues until no progress is made, and Almander storms out of the meeting room in exasperation. As they walk away, she vents her frustration, completely baffled by Terius' sudden resistance. At first, he seemed perfectly willing to accept the pact, and everything was going well. But just when they were about to finalize the agreement, he suddenly started shouting, "Nay, nay," over and over again. She even tried returning multiple times to check if he had changed his mind, but each time, he would only repeat the same response, "Nay." No further explanation, no elaboration, just endless, stubborn refusal. At this point, Almander sees no way to resolve the situation, so she dumps the entire mess onto Danask, fully expecting him to fail spectacularly. Danask, on the other hand, is spiraling into a full-blown panic attack. There's absolutely no way to salvage this. If even Almander couldn't get through to Terius, how is he supposed to? Desperate for a moment to think, he aimlessly wanders through the halls. That's when he spots a bar sign and decides to step inside to clear his head. The bartender hands him a warm towel to help him relax, and Danask orders a drink as he sits down to collect his thoughts. He would love to work on the negotiations, but what's the point if the client flat out refuses to cooperate? But then, as he stares into his drink, a thought hits him. Maybe Terius isn't actually refusing to negotiate at all. Danask has been in this situation before. Back in his old job, he once dealt with a client who kept rejecting every proposal thrown his way. But when Danask really took a moment to look into the man's eyes, he realized that what the client was saying and what he truly meant were two very different things. By understanding that, Danask was able to turn the situation around and successfully strike a deal. Now, he knows exactly what he has to do. He quickly finishes his drink, straightens his posture, and steps outside with renewed purpose. It's time to do what businessmen do best, negotiate. Meanwhile, back in the Demon Lord's throne room, Almander delivers her report. Her conversation with Terius went absolutely nowhere, so she has zero faith that Danask will be able to accomplish anything either, especially considering the fact that he just arrived in this world today. However, the Demon Lord remains unconvinced. He still believes in Danask's abilities and instructs her to wait and see what he can achieve. Almander doesn't understand what the Demon Lord sees in this weak, powerless human, but she ultimately decides to check on Danask anyway, if only to confirm his inevitable failure. When she finally finds him, however, she's met with an unexpected sight. He's in the middle of stuffing several bags full of hay. Completely confused, she demands to know what the hell he's doing. Danask simply smiles and tells her that he's preparing to have a proper conversation with Terius. She scoffs at the idea, reminding him that Terius has made it perfectly clear that he has no interest in negotiating. But Danask doesn't buy it. He still believes there's a chance to make this work. All he has to do is look Terius in the eyes and communicate his feelings in a way that the Minotaur chief will understand. Almander narrows her eyes, expecting to see that same nervous, overwhelmed expression from before. But to her surprise, Danask actually looks confident. Without a hint of hesitation, he strides back into the meeting room, completely unshaken this time. The next morning, Almander returns to check on him, half expecting to find nothing but a bloody mess. But when she pushes open the door, she's met with a bizarre sight, an empty room, filled with nothing but hay. There's no sign of Danask, no sign of Terius. For a moment, panic sets in. Did the negotiations fail so miserably that it escalated into a massive fight? Did Terius completely obliterate him? Just as she's about to assume the worst, Danask suddenly walks in, completely unharmed. With a casual smile, he reassures her, everything's fine. At this point, Almander demands an explanation. First, she wants to know why there's hay scattered all over their sacred demon castle, and more importantly, she wants to know where the hell Terius disappeared to. Danask casually tells her that Terius is currently finalizing the pact agreement with the Demon Lord. Almander can't believe what she's hearing. There's no way this weak little human managed to get Terius to agree, in just one night, no less. Danask shrugs and explains that it was actually pretty simple. He just took the time to understand Terius properly, and once he did, The entire negotiation process became ridiculously easy. Almindra had assumed that Terius was outright refusing the pact because he kept yelling nay over and over again. But in reality, Terius thought the negotiations were going great. Denosk has actually dealt with this kind of situation before. Back at his old job, he once had an international client who was weirdly enthusiastic about saying no to everything. Naturally, Denosk assumed the whole deal was doomed to fail. But to his complete shock, the client suddenly reached out for a handshake. Turns out it had all just been a massive misunderstanding. The same thing applied to Terius. So Denosk did a little research into Minotaur culture and discovered that whenever Minotaurs visit someone else's home, they always bring hay with them so they have a proper place to sleep. That entire time, Terius wasn't rejecting the negotiations. He was just trying to ask for his hay. Once Denosk figured that out, everything else fell into place, and the negotiations went off without a hitch. Almindra suddenly realizes that she completely misread the situation and left Terius to sleep on the cold floor like some abandoned pet. Now she feels like a total jerk. But Terius, being the chill bull that he is, tells her not to worry about it. It was just a simple misunderstanding, and he's not holding a grudge. To prove it, he extends his hand, and Almindra shakes it, officially putting the matter behind them. As Terius heads out, the Demon Lord approaches Denosk and Almindra. With a knowing smile, he asks Almindra if she finally understands why he wants Denosk on their team. Almindra hesitates for a moment, then sighs in defeat. She has to admit, when it comes to negotiating, Denosk is the real deal, and since he passed the Demon Lord's test. With that, the Demon Lord officially appoints Denosk as one of his 4 elite generals, sealing the deal by placing a bracelet on his arm as a mark of his new status. As a sign of her newfound respect for him, Almindra formally introduces herself and expresses that she looks forward to working with him, not just as a colleague, but as a friend. Denosk is finally beginning to settle into his role as a demon general. It's definitely a nice change of pace having his own office and a boss who actually values him, but this whole situation is still going to take some getting used to. Now that his position is official, he figures the next step is to formally introduce himself to the other demon generals. With that in mind, he heads over to Sylphid's quarters and knocks on the door. To his surprise, a girl answers. She immediately gives him an unimpressed look and demands to know what he wants. Denosk politely explains that he came to introduce himself to Sylphid. The girl, however, isn't having it. With an icy glare, she informs him that she is Sylphid's assistant, and Sylphid himself is an extremely busy man. She refuses to let Denosk disturb him. Denosk sighs in disappointment, but honestly, he kind of expected something like this. He knew from the start that some of the other demon generals would push back against him joining their ranks. Since he's not getting anywhere, he figures he'll just come back another time and try again. But before he can leave, Almindra comes sprinting down the hall toward him, looking like she has something urgent to say. Catching her breath, she informs him that the Demon Lord has another assignment for him. Denosk wastes no time and immediately goes to meet with the Demon Lord. There, he is briefed on a crucial negotiation in progress. In order for the demon army to continue growing in power, the Demon Lord needs the support of all the surrounding demi-human nations. Out of all of them, the Ogre tribe holds particular significance. The Ogres command a military force that rivals that of the Demon Army, making them one of the most influential forces in the region. However, this also makes them a potential threat to the Demon Empire if relations turn hostile. That's why the Demon Lord wants to negotiate a merger, combining their strengths to form an even greater force. The problem? Ogres are notoriously stubborn and difficult to reason with, so talks haven't gone anywhere so far. But now that Denosk is on the case, the Demon Lord is confident that an agreement can be reached. And to ensure Denosk has the full authority he needs, the Demon Lord is granting him complete control over the negotiations. Denosk is genuinely relieved to see just how much trust the Demon Lord has in him. But there's a very real possibility that he'll end up as Ogre Chow if he goes in alone. Sensing this, Almindra steps up and volunteers to escort him to the Ogre tribe. However, before they head out, Denosk mentions that he wants to pay a visit to Gnome first. Since she oversees the Dim-Human division of the Demon Army, she might have some useful intel about the ogres that could help with negotiations. Almindra acknowledges that this is a smart move, but she absolutely refuses to go anywhere near Gnome. Turns out, she and Gnome have some long-standing, generational beef, and the last thing she wants is to deal with that right now. With that, Denosk makes his way to the training grounds, where Gnome is in the middle of leading a daily training session. Watching from the sidelines, he's immediately impressed. Not only are her soldiers highly skilled in combat, but she also knows how to keep their morale sky high. Once training wraps up, Gnome turns toward him, arms crossed, and bluntly asks what he wants. Denosk explains that he came to see if she has any useful information about the Ogre tribe. Gnome shrugs and tells him she doesn't know much. However, she does warn him that the tribe's leader is notoriously difficult to talk to, so he's going to have a hell of a time negotiating with him. Beyond that, she has no useful advice to offer. Not that she would want to help anyway. She'd rather do just about anything else than work alongside Almindra. With that, she tells Denosk to kindly get out of her sight. Denosk is caught off guard by the sudden hostility until he notices Almindra standing right behind him. Confused, he turns to her and asks why she's even here, and more importantly, why she looks like she's about 5 seconds away from throwing hands. Almindra explains that she already finished checking on the carriages, so she came to fetch Denosk, worried that he might need backup. However, the moment she laid eyes on Gnome, all that concern flew out the window, and the two immediately started butting heads. Denosk, now caught between their growing hostility, is starting to wonder just how deep this grudge runs. The way they're going at it, he half expects one of them to draw a weapon. After managing to pry himself away from the brewing storm, Denosk and Almindra finally reach the Ogre Castle. Before they can step inside, however, they're halted at the gate and told to wait until Ogre grants them permission to enter. Almindra, predictably, is not having it. She grumbles about how absurd it is to be left waiting outside for this long. Denosk, on the other hand, recognizes this for what it is, a classic intimidation tactic. The key to dealing with this is patience. As long as they keep their cool, they won't be at a disadvantage. Unfortunately, Almindra is about 2 seconds away from losing hers. Before she can explode, Ogre's assistant finally emerges and informs them that they're allowed to enter. As they step inside, Denosk's eyes immediately catch on something odd. Ogre's armor looks rough, almost neglected. Eventually, they reach the throne room, where they finally come face to face with Ogre himself. Almindra, determined to take charge, opens her mouth to kick off negotiations, only for Ogre to cut her off with a sharp glare and a single, dismissive command. She's about to throw hands right then and there, but before she can make a move, Denosk grabs her wrist. He calmly tells her to take a deep breath and keep her cool, because losing her temper is exactly what Ogre wants. Then, with the most polished businessman voice he can muster, Denosk turns to Ogre and politely informs him that he and Almindra will be stepping outside for a moment to discuss something. Once they're outside, Almindra finally lets loose, cursing Ogre's very existence for having the audacity to suggest such a thing. She's ready to storm back in and rip him apart with her bare hands, but Denosk stops her again. He explains that they can't take the bait. Over is deliberately provoking them, hoping they'll lash out and cause a scene. That way, when negotiations inevitably break down, he can shift the blame onto them instead of outright rejecting the deal himself. Now that she understands Over's underhanded tactics, Omandra takes a deep breath and reins in her fury, though she's still fuming over the insult to the demon lord. Denosk is just as furious, but he knows that acting on that anger will only ruin any chance they have of making progress here. That being said, with Over refusing to negotiate, their options are looking pretty limited. Just then, the girl from earlier approaches them. She formally introduces herself as Over's daughter, Alyalu, and apologizes in advance for how rude her request might sound. Then, without hesitation, she asks for their help in overthrowing her father. She leads them down a hallway to a secluded room where she reveals what she's really dealing with. This, she says, gesturing to the empty space around them, is the food cellar. Denosk and Omandra take one look around and immediately realize what she's trying to show them. There's not a single scrap of food left in storage. The ogre tribe is known for its military strength and influence among the demi-humans, but recently, they've been struggling financially. Things have gotten so dire that many of their people are going hungry, unable to afford even the most basic meals. Denosk had a feeling something like this was going on. From the moment they arrived, he noticed the sorry state of the ogre's gear, not to mention the cold, lifeless atmosphere of the castle itself. This kind of thing happens all the time with big companies that are circling the drain. They act like everything is fine, but behind the scenes, they're teetering on the edge of financial ruin. And that's exactly what's happening to the ogre tribe. Alyalu firmly believes that the only way to rebuild their tribe is to seek help from the demon army. However, her father refuses to consider it. On top of that, he's gravely ill. They've been keeping his condition under wraps, which is why they made Denosk and Omandra wait outside while they got him ready for the meeting. But no matter what they do, his health is deteriorating. Soon, he won't have much time left. If Over dies while their tribe is in this fragile state, it will mean the end of the ogre tribe as they know it. So she begs Denosk to help her. Denosk acknowledges her concerns, but immediately scolds her for being so reckless with such vital information. As the chief's daughter, she should be more careful about who she trusts with something this critical. But Alyalu simply smiles. She's confident in her ability to judge people, and she can tell that Denosk is a good person. That's exactly why she told him everything. And now, she has just one more request. She wants Denosk to save the ogre tribe by marrying her. The moment the words leave her mouth, Denosk completely loses it, and Omandra nearly combusts with fury. But Alyalu isn't joking. She's dead serious. Every single ogre in the tribe is dumb as bricks, and if she lets any of them take over after her father dies, their people are doomed. The only way to ensure the prosperity of both the ogre tribe and the demon army is for someone smart, like Denosk, to take over as the new chief. Denosk desperately tries to talk Alyalu out of making such a drastic decision, but she won't hear it. She's convinced that this is the only viable solution, and she's prepared to make their marriage official on the spot. Omandra, however, is having none of that. Later that night, Denosk sits in his office, staring at the ceiling, wondering how in the world he's supposed to get himself out of this mess. Over refuses to negotiate with him. Alyalu is ready to throw a wedding, and he absolutely cannot afford to botch his second major assignment for the demon lord. So Denosk heads over to the bar inside his mind to clear his thoughts. But this time, he's not the only one there. An imaginary version of Omandra is sitting at the table beside him, locked in a heated argument with the bartender over whether gorillas or lions are cooler. Logically speaking, a gorilla would wipe the floor with a lion any day of the week, no contest. But Omandra fires back, insisting that lions are way cooler because a group of them is called a pride. The second Denosk hears that word, pride, something clicks in his brain. And just like that, he has a rock-solid strategy to deal with this situation. The very next morning, Denosk drags Omandra outside and apologizes for waking her up at such an ungodly hour, but he needs her help with an important negotiation. However, before they can get started, there's another stop they need to make. If everything goes according to plan, then by the end of this, it'll be Over begging for a meeting. 1 week later, just as Denosk predicted, he and Omandra are summoned to the chief's throne room, and Over looks absolutely livid. Turns out, he just found out that every single surrounding tribe has formed an alliance with the demon army over the past week, and he's demanding answers. 7 days earlier, Denosk had laid out his plan to Omandra. Instead of trying to win Over first, they would recruit all the smaller tribes first. Since those tribes were struggling with food shortages, just like the ogres, they would be easy to sway with the promise of demon army support. Omandra had understood the logic behind the plan, but she never expected it to work this well. Denosk's gambit had left Over with no choice but to negotiate. The whole idea was based on a tactic Denosk had used back on Earth when selling a product. Whenever he approached big companies directly, they would usually reject him outright. So instead, he focused on selling to smaller businesses first. Once enough of them bought in, the big company would eventually reach out on their own, afraid of missing out. This was the exact same strategy. If all the surrounding demi-human tribes allied with the demon army, there was no way the proud ogre chief would sit by and let them outmaneuver him. For now, Denosk keeps up the act, pretending he had only reached out to the smaller tribes because they were struggling and needed help. But his feigned innocence only makes Over angrier. He never agreed to any negotiations, and now he's losing his temper, which is exactly what Denosk wanted. With Over now more vulnerable to Denosk's negotiation tactics, it's the perfect moment to strike. Denosk calmly explains that these alliances weren't solely his doing. He had help from none other than Alyalu. Over is stunned, unable to believe that his own daughter would go behind his back like this. But Alyalu stands firm, telling him that it was the only way to secure the future of their Obra tribe. Whether he likes it or not, times have changed. He's not as strong as he used to be, and with his failing health, the tribe won't survive without the demon army support. Before Over can react, Denosk smoothly steps in with an alternative solution. Instead of outright joining the demon army, why not form an equal partnership? Of course, Denosk is completely making this up on the spot. The terms haven't changed one bit, but framing it as an equal partnership is exactly the kind of phrasing that will appeal to Over's pride. And just as Denosk expected, Over doesn't outright reject the offer. Instead, he asked for some time to consider it. A few days later, Omandra bursts into Denosk's office, practically vibrating with excitement. She has huge news. Over has officially agreed to the alliance with the demon army. This is a major win, but Denosk barely has time to celebrate because he has another pressing issue. The demon lord has ordered him to select a personal assistant, and he spent the past few days drowning in applications, trying to find the right candidate. Honestly, he'd rather just choose Omandra since she's already so reliable. But when he casually mentions this, Omandra completely misinterprets his words as some kind of roundabout proposal. For the first time ever, she actually looks flustered. Before Danusk can clarify, there's a knock at the door. He opens it to find Alyalu standing there. She introduces herself as the official representative of the ogre tribe for their new alliance and expresses her heartfelt gratitude. Ever since their last meeting, her father has become much more diplomatic, and it's all thanks to Danusk's efforts. To show her appreciation, she says she's willing to do anything in return. Since she said anything, Danusk seizes the opportunity and asks if she'd like to become his personal assistant. Alyalu is thrilled to accept, but Omandra, she's definitely not happy. She pointedly refuses to make eye contact with Danusk, stewing in her jealousy, reminding herself that they are rivals, which means they absolutely cannot be friends. Danusk has absolutely no clue why Omandra suddenly started acting all weird, but that aside, things have been going well for him. The demon army has expanded significantly this past month, which is great, but with growth comes added risk. That means everyone needs to stay on high alert. A couple of days go by, and Danusk is buried in paperwork as usual when Alyalu walks into his office. She informs him that she successfully reached an agreement with the bear tribe, just like he asked. As long as he meets their conditions, they're willing to lend their support to the demon army. Danusk is relieved to hear that negotiations went smoothly, but before he can get too comfortable, Alyalu has another piece of news for him. Apparently, word has spread that Danusk is about to receive a reward for all the effort he's put in. The award ceremony is coming up soon, but she'll fill him in on the details after his lunch break. Danusk has no idea what kind of reward is waiting for him, but knowing the demon lord, it's probably something better than a sad office pizza party. Just as he's wondering about it, Omandra strolls into his office carrying lunch for them to share, like always. Danusk enjoys eating with her, but he absolutely despises the fact that the only thing the demon army ever serves is bland porridge. He understands that feeding an entire army comes with logistical challenges, but would it kill them to throw in some meat every now and then? Omandra hears his whining and immediately comes up with a solution. If Danusk wants meat, then they'll just have to go straight to the source. Danusk really doesn't love the idea of hunting for his food, but it turns out that's not the only reason Omandra dragged him outside. She recently received a request from the nearby demi-human tribes to take down a dangerous magical beast that has been attacking people in the forest. So far, 5 orcs have already fallen victim to this creature. Danusk is horrified, but Omandra sees things differently. In her eyes, it's only natural for the weak to be preyed upon by the strong. Normally, the orc tribe should be the ones dealing with this, but the beast is far beyond anything they can handle. She refuses to stand by and let them be wiped out, so she agreed to take care of it herself. As they walk deeper into the woods, Omandra notices a patch of mushrooms growing under a tree. According to the reports, every orc that was attacked had been picking these exact mushrooms when the beast struck. Since these mushrooms are a valuable ingredient, the magical beast must be lurking somewhere nearby. If they stay put for a while, it's bound to show up sooner or later. Turns out, they didn't have to wait long at all. The beast, a massive boar, appears behind them almost instantly. Omandra wastes no time ordering Danusk to get to safety while she takes care of it. She leaps high into the air and brings her heel crashing down onto the boar's skull, slamming it into the dirt. But the beast isn't going down that easily. In retaliation, it uses its horns to fling rocks in her direction. Omandra dodges with ease, but Danusk, not so much. He's absolutely losing his mind, trying to avoid getting crushed. The boar then goes on a rampage, tearing through trees as it charges straight at Danusk. Just before impact, Omandra delivers a devastating punch to its gut, sending it skidding backward. Danusk has seen firsthand how absurdly strong Omandra is, but he notices something. None of her attacks are actually lethal. That wouldn't be an issue in a normal fight, but right now, they're hunting this thing. If she wants to end it quickly, she needs more killing power. The boar's tusks are dangerous weapons, and if Omandra makes even a single misstep, she could end up fatally wounded. Meanwhile, her own attacks only deal blunt trauma, which isn't enough to finish the job. What she really needs is a weapon. Danusk's suspicions are correct. Omandra's strikes aren't lethal because she's holding back. She doesn't like using her full strength since it takes a long time for her body to recover afterward. However, if she wants to take this thing down for good, she has no other choice. The boar lunges at her again, but this time, Omandra catches it mid-charge with just one hand. Right now, she could obliterate it with a single punch, but that would ruin the meat. Instead, she opts for a more controlled approach. Gripping the beast firmly, she twists and snaps its neck in one swift motion. With the fight over, Omandra casually tells Danusk that they can finally have some meat. Danusk, on the other hand, suddenly isn't hungry anymore, dragging the boar's corpse back to the orc village. They present it as proof that the threat has been eliminated. The villagers are beyond grateful and amazed that Omandra handled such a dangerous beast. The villagers are all hyped up for the feast, but Danusk can't wrap his head around how they're so eager to chow down on boar meat, especially when that thing was basically one evolutionary step away from being their next-door neighbor. What really throws him for a loop, though, is when Omandra declares that she'll be the one cooking the meat. Danusk stares at her, completely dumbfounded, and asks if she's actually serious about this. Omandra doesn't even hesitate. She insists that her cooking is top tier and offers him a taste of her personal specialty. Danusk starts getting a little excited. The way she hypes it up, it actually sounds like it might be good. And then he watches in horror as she casually lobs a fireball at the meat. What's left behind is a scorched, unrecognizable hunk of charcoal, and the sheer disappointment on Danusk's face says it all. Omandra, however, insists that it's not as bad as it looks and urges him to take a bite. He takes one reluctant mouthful and immediately regrets every life decision that led him to this moment. It tastes exactly as awful as it looks, like someone just dumped a bucket of molten asphalt into his mouth. He'd honestly rather go hungry than force down another bite of this abomination. Omandra gets a little huffy and tells him it's rude to insult someone's cooking, but Danusk fires right back, saying it's even ruder to call whatever she just did cooking. So far, he's managed to stomach all the culture shocks that come with living in this world. But this is where he draws the line. Right then and there, he makes an executive decision. He's taking over all future cooking responsibilities. Once Danusk finishes preparing the meat properly, Omandra takes a bite and is immediately hit with the realization that this actually tastes incredible. Stunned, she demands to know what kind of sorcery he pulled off to make it so good. Danusk explains that first, he soaked the meat in water to draw out all the blood, then he slow roasted it over a fire to burn off the excess fat, bringing out the flavor. And finally, adding the meat to his soup helps eliminate any lingering bad odors. Danusk offers to teach the villagers if they're interested, and they're genuinely appreciative that one of the demon generals is taking the time to help them. However, Omandra doesn't see the point. She thinks someone of Denosk's rank shouldn't be wasting his time giving cooking lessons to common villagers. Denosk shuts that down immediately, telling her she's got it all wrong. His job is to strengthen the demon army, and one of the most crucial steps in the progress of any civilization is improving its culinary skills. When a society eats meat regularly, it naturally experiments with different ways to enhance its flavor. But since meat is such a rare commodity here, nobody's had the opportunity to develop proper cooking techniques. In other words, this country is both poor and severely lacking in culinary knowledge. The way he phrases it is brutally honest, but Omandra can't really argue, because he's absolutely right. Compared to the neighboring nations, this land is barren and weak, but that just means they need to work even harder to catch up, especially as one of the big four. Now that their work here is done, Omandra suggests they head back to the castle. Denosk, however, isn't so sure. It's already dark out, and traveling at night doesn't seem like the safest idea. Omandra reassures him that it won't be a problem. With a flick of her wrist, she conjures a fireball, lighting up the path ahead with ease. She's clearly proud of her magic skills, and honestly, Denosk is a little impressed too. It also explains why demi-humans can't use magic. They have to rely on constant physical training to survive, whereas demons like Omandra can lean entirely on their magical abilities. That being said, Denosk still thinks Omandra could refine her combat strategy a little. For example, while her raw attack power skyrockets when she taps into her true strength, the recovery time afterwards is a huge drawback. So he suggests she start carrying a weapon to make fights easier in the future. He also mentions that she should consider wearing armor that provides more coverage for better protection. The moment he says this, Omandra comes to an abrupt stop, and then, without a word, snuffs out her fireball. She knows Denosk has a point, but the way he coldly prioritizes efficiency over everything else feels like an insult to her abilities. Frustrated beyond belief, she decides she's had enough. Without looking back, she leaves Denosk stranded in the dark forest, fuming too much to deal with him any longer. Denosk, meanwhile, is left standing there, completely baffled by why she got so angry. But before he can figure that out, he realizes he has much bigger problems, because if he stays out here much longer, something in this forest is definitely going to eat him. With survival instincts kicking in, he bolts straight back to the orc village to wait out the night in safety. The next morning, Denosk meets with the Demon Lord to report on the mission, and the Demon Lord congratulates him on yet another successful operation. But he's also heard that Omandra returned to the castle last night, while Denosk only arrived this morning, escorted by the orcs. That's suspicious, so the Demon Lord wants to know if something happened between them. At this point, Denosk just breaks down. He tells the Demon Lord he isn't worthy of being one of the Demon Army's generals. The Demon Lord tells him to calm down and explain, so Denosk recounts everything that went down. It's pretty clear to the Demon Lord that Denosk accidentally offended Omandra, but what matters now is fixing things for the sake of the Demon Army. So, he gives Denosk an official order to make amends with Omandra. Easier said than done. Denosk remembers how proud Omandra was when she claimed demons were the only ones capable of using magic, but there has to be something deeper to it. Determined to figure it out, he starts digging through a demon history book. Eventually, he finds a chapter explaining that a well-toned physique is crucial for a demon's magical power. That's why demons take immense pride in their bodies and why they tend to wear extremely revealing clothing. And just like that, everything clicks. Now Denosk understands why Omandra got so pissed off. By telling her that she should wear more armor for efficiency, he basically spat in the face of her demon pride. But even though he now knows why she got mad, he still has no idea how to fix this mess. Meanwhile, back at the castle, Alyalo has just finished chopping up the firewood for the day. She's about to move on to her next task when she suddenly finds herself face to face with an overwhelming aura of despair. Omandra looks absolutely devastated. Before Alyalo can even ask what's wrong, Omandra throws herself at her, sobbing that Denosk hates her and refuses to acknowledge her body. Alyalo is completely baffled at first, but after Omandra explains the situation, she starts piecing things together. She tells Omandra that Denosk is a human, which means his values are completely different from theirs. In particular, Alyalo knows that Denosk doesn't view showing off your body as a positive thing. Omandra is in utter disbelief. She's been walking around practically naked in front of him for weeks, and he never once complained. Alyalo clarifies that Denosk probably just assumed Omandra was some kind of exhibitionist and didn't want to say anything. The realization hits Omandra like a thunderbolt. If Denosk truly was uncomfortable with her exposed body, then all the time she flaunted herself in front of him must have come across as some bizarre form of deviant behavior. She's so mortified and pissed at herself for ditching Denosk in the forest that she starts slamming her face into the floor. Alyalo, completely horrified, begs her to stop because at this rate, the floor is going to give out before her skull does. Omandra groans in frustration and asks Alyalo what she should do now. She got mad at Denosk for no reason, so how's she supposed to face him? That's when Alyalo remembers something Denosk told her when she first became his assistant. He had told her to always stay true to her desires, no matter what. More importantly, he wanted her to feel free to talk about anything that troubled her so they could find a solution together. So, no matter what kind of misunderstanding happened between them, Alyalo is certain that as long as Omandra talks it out with Denosk, they'll be able to work things out. Later, Denosk and Omandra finally run into each other in the castle stairwell, both with something really important to say. Omandra blurts out that she's not some shameless floozy, she just wanted him to compliment her body. At the exact same time, Denosk says that he actually does think her body is hot. They both freeze. After a second, they process what the other just said. Since it sounds like they're both on the same page now, Denosk apologizes to Omandra. He didn't know much about demon culture, and he hadn't realized that what he said would be so offensive to her. Omandra sighs, accepting his apology, but she also apologizes to him. It wasn't his fault that he didn't understand demon customs, and even though she was mad, she shouldn't have left him alone in the middle of a monster-infested forest. Considering the fact that he almost died out there, she feels ridiculously guilty. But since he made it back in one piece, Denosk tells her it's fine. He's just glad they could make up. Now that they've learned a little more about each other, Denosk thinks they'll make great partners moving forward. He still doesn't realize that Omandra just interpreted that as a full-blown marriage proposal. Later on, the Demon Lord gathers all his subordinates for a special announcement. Thanks to the alliances they've formed with various tribes, the demon army has become stronger than ever. And this wouldn't have been possible without the tireless efforts of his newest general, Denosk. So, in honor of his achievements, the Demon Lord is awarding him with this magic stone. Denosk is deeply honored to receive such a priceless magic stone, but he doesn't feel right accepting it on his own. After all, he didn't accomplish all of this by himself. None of it would have been possible without Omandra by his side. So, without hesitation, he walks over to her, kneels on one knee, and asks her to accept the stone with him. Omandra is thrilled but also completely freaking out. Does he seriously not realize what he's doing? He's pulling this grand gesture in front of the entire demon army leadership. What makes it even worse is that Danusk has no idea that presenting a magic stone to a woman is literally the most direct way to propose marriage in this world. So, in front of all the demon army's top officials, he just unknowingly asked Omandra to marry him. The only reason she doesn't immediately say yes is because she's so flustered by everyone watching. A few days later, Danusk gets summoned to a private meeting with the demon lord. Naturally, his first thought is that he must have done something wrong. So, before the demon lord even has a chance to speak, Danusk immediately starts apologizing and begging to keep his job. The demon lord just stares at him, baffled. He quickly reassures Danusk that he's not in trouble. In fact, they literally just held an entire award ceremony for him a few days ago because of how well he's been doing. With that out of the way, the demon lord moves on to the real reason he called Danusk in. He wants to know Danusk's thoughts on the current relationship between the demi-humans and the demons in the demon army. From what Danusk has observed, it's clear that the demi-humans feel inferior to the demons, mainly because only demons are capable of using magic. And that, the demon lord explains, is exactly the problem he's been trying to solve. So the demon lord tasks Danusk with figuring out a way for everyone to use magic. That way, demi-humans will no longer be at a disadvantage and can stand on equal footing with demons. Danusk agrees that it's a solid plan, but there's just one glaring issue: he doesn't know how to use magic himself. How is he supposed to make magic accessible to everyone if he can't even use it in the first place? The demon lord acknowledges that this won't be easy, but that's exactly why he gave Danusk the magic stone. He's granting Danusk full control over how to use it to achieve this goal. Of course, Danusk won't have to tackle this challenge alone. To help him, the demon lord has assigned a magic expert. That expert is Sylphid, who is apparently a genius when it comes to magic. However, before Danusk gets too excited, the demon lord warns him that Sylphid is, well, a bit of a headache to deal with. Danusk assures him that he understands and sets off to find Sylphid. Meanwhile, Omandra is lurking behind a railing, keeping a close eye on him. For the past few days, she's been low-key spying on Danusk whenever she gets the chance. Partly because she's curious about his work, but mostly because she still gets butterflies whenever she remembers that public marriage proposal incident. Danusk eventually makes it to Sylphid's quarters and knocks on the door. Instead of Sylphid, a woman named Belinda answers. She tells Danusk that Sylphid isn't here at the moment, so he'll have to come back later. Then she immediately tries to shut the door in his face. But Danusk isn't about to let that slide. He wedges his foot in the doorway and insists on coming in anyway. Omandra witnesses this entire exchange, and now she's starting to get pissed. Did Danusk seriously just propose to her a few days ago only to turn around and flirt with some other woman? Inside the room, Belinda keeps trying to get Danusk to leave, insisting that Sylphid isn't around. But Danusk isn't buying it for a second. Because he already knows the truth, Belinda is Sylphid. Belinda tries to brush off Danusk's accusations, but he's got two solid reasons to call her out on her lie. First, he's memorized the list of every official in the demon army, and there's no Belinda on the payroll. Second, the demon lord already ratted her out and told Danusk that she has a habit of disguising herself to avoid work. With her cover blown, Sylphid gives up and admits he's right. But Danusk still doesn't get why she would go as far as pretending to be her own assistant. Sylphid just shrugs and explains that if people knew who she really was, they'd dump a mountain of work on her, and she hates work. That may be true, but Danusk has something important to discuss with her. He asks if she can spare a moment to talk about magic tools. Unfortunately for him, Sylphid immediately shuts him down. She refuses to do anything that requires effort, even if it's a direct order from the demon lord. Besides, she already made something like that in the past, so there's no reason for her to go through the trouble of making it again. Danusk had no idea Sylphid had worked on magic tools before, so his curiosity is piqued. Seeing his interest, she decides to show him her invention. She pulls out a strange device and explains that it's crafted with a mineral base that allows magic to flow through it effortlessly. On top of that, layers of magic stones are embedded into it, enabling it to cast all sorts of spells. That sounds exactly like what Danusk is looking for. Excited, he asks if he can get permission to mass produce it. Sylphid, however, tells him he's free to try, but there's one huge problem: this prototype cost 50 million to make. If he really wants to mass produce it, he'll need to pull off some next-level financial wizardry to fund the whole thing. After all, the device requires high-grade magic stones, which don't come cheap. Danusk is still reeling from the ridiculous price tag, but now it makes sense why Sylphid never put these into production. Even so, he's not about to give up just yet. He asks if they could reduce the cost by limiting the number of spells the device can cast. From what she told him, the reason it needs high-level magic stones is because it has to support multiple spells. So what if they restricted it to just one spell? Sylphid is intrigued because she never considered that possibility. After giving it some thought, she confirms that doing so would significantly cut costs. If the device only needed to cast a single spell, they could swap out the high-level magic stones for much cheaper, low-level ones. She's actually impressed that Danusk came up with such a simple yet effective idea in no time at all. And it just so happens that he has a magic stone on hand. So he hands it over to Sylphid and asks if this one will work. Sylphid is really starting to get into this idea now, and since they already have all the materials they need, she's ready to get to work immediately. But she's going to need an assistant, so she grabs Danusk and drags him down into her basement, where she has absolutely zero intention of letting him get a wink of sleep tonight. Meanwhile, just outside Sylphid's room, Omandra is getting real suspicious. What the hell is Danusk doing in another woman's office so late at night? The next morning, Danusk is slumped on the basement floor, barely clinging to life from sheer exhaustion. Sylphid isn't looking much better, but unlike Danusk, she's hyped because she actually managed to completely redesign her magic tool to cast a single spell. Now this thing can be mass-produced for a fraction of the cost of her original model, and it's all thanks to her genius. However, before they can roll out mass production, they need to test it first. And who better to be the test subject than Danusk? Danusk begs her to at least give him a moment to rest since he's about 2 blinks away from passing out. Sylphid actually grants him mercy for 1 hour. Then he better drag himself back down here for testing. As Danusk stumbles toward the front door, ready to finally escape, he reaches out to open it. But before he can do anything, Omandra kicks the door open and demands to know what he's been doing all night. Danusk, already on his last legs, takes the hit and promptly collapses. Now panicking, Omandra gets on her knees and starts shaking him in an attempt to wake him up. But all it's doing is making him more disoriented. At that moment, Sylphid emerges from the basement in her usual outfit, meaning Omandra doesn't recognize her as the mystery woman from before. Omandra starts second-guessing herself. Maybe she didn't see what she thought she saw? But before she can think too hard about it, Lilam, Omandra's assistant, and Ayula suddenly burst into the room in a panic. There's a huge emergency. A flock of Asiata birds has attacked multiple villages, and if something isn't done fast, those villages will be completely wiped out. Asiata birds are massive, flightless creatures with nasty tempers, and they're such a significant threat that the Demon Lord has issued an immediate order. Do whatever it takes to drive those birds away. That's why Lilam came rushing in to find Omandra, because she's the only one powerful enough to handle a flock of this size. As she's being dragged away, Omandra voices her frustration. She just wanted to spend some quality time with Danusk. But Sylphid? She sees this as the perfect chance to put her new magic device to the test. So naturally, she drags Danusk out to the battlefield. Once outside, Danusk turns to the villagers and warns them to keep their distance since whatever they're about to do might be extremely dangerous. Sylphid sets the magic stone to cast a simple fire spell and hands it over to Danusk so he can try it out. Before going through with this, Danusk asks if the device has any safety features, to which Sylphid cheerfully replies that even if it does explode, the worst that'll happen is that he'll only lose an arm. That definitely doesn't make him feel any better. Even so, he decides to give it a shot. As the flock of Asiata birds barrels toward them, Sylphid instructs him to start drawing power from the device. It immediately starts making a weird noise, but Sylphid just waves it off, telling him that's totally normal. Now, she wants him to visualize the device as a natural extension of his body and allow the energy to flow until it gathers in his right hand. Danusk follows her instructions, and before long, he's got an actual fireball floating in his palm. He can't believe it. He's actually using magic. Since phase 1 is a success, Sylphid gives him the go-ahead to start attacking. Danusk isn't sure if it'll be effective, but he hurls a fireball at one of the birds anyway, and obliterates it. Sylphid urges him to keep at it until every last bird is taken care of. So Danusk goes all in, lobbing fireball after fireball. And for the first time since arriving in this world, he actually feels strong, like he can really hold his own in a fight. But that feeling of power doesn't last long, because the very next moment, the magic device burns out. Danusk suddenly finds himself completely powerless. One of the birds charges at him, ready to take him out. But before it can reach him, Sylphid raises a protective barrier, keeping him safe. Danusk desperately tries to use the device again, but instead of letting him cast magic, it's now just slowly attracting the birds. Sylphid takes out the ones that were coming for him, then turns to ask why he stopped using the device. Danusk holds up the crystal, and it's clearly been overloaded. It turns out that low-level magic crystals just aren't enough to keep the device running for long. So, in the end, this experiment is a bust. For now, though, they at least manage to drive the birds away, so the villagers decide to celebrate by cooking up a big pot of stew using the bird meat. While Danusk is off getting himself a bowl, he notices Sylphid hanging out by a tree, playing with one of the demi-human children. He walks over, a little surprised. He'd always assumed that all demi-humans were naturally strong, but he never realized that some of them were this frail. Sylphid nods in agreement. Even so, she points out that while they may be weak, demi-humans like these are also incredibly kind. And seeing them like this reminds her of something from her past. She explains that she was originally born into a family of elf merchants, but something went terribly wrong, and she was eventually cast out. With nowhere to go, she wandered for a long time, until she was finally welcomed into a village of demi-humans. They were unbelievably kind to her, but there was just one problem. None of them could use magic. Because of that, they were forced to live in poverty. Sylphid wanted to help them, so she dedicated herself to inventing a device that would let them wield magic. But somewhere along the way, she got distracted and completely lost sight of her original goal. She turns to Danusk and tells him that, above all else, her purpose as a researcher is to help people. So no matter what, they have to find a way to make this project a success, especially since more of those birds are bound to come back. Danusk thinks for a moment, and then a brilliant idea hits him. So he asks Sylphid if she can whip up a few more of those magic devices by tomorrow morning. Since she already finished the designs, it shouldn't take long to produce more. But she won't be able to make any improvements to the blueprint without her full set of tools. Danusk tells her not to worry about that. He doesn't need any changes, because what he's planning will work just fine with the current design. The next morning, Danusk and Sylphid step outside to face the incoming flock of birds as they charge toward the village. But before the creatures can get close, Danusk activates the magic devices he had planted in the ground ahead of time. The loud, unsettling sound of all the devices powering on at once is so jarring that the birds immediately panic. And just like that, they turn tail and flee. And the best part? Since no actual spells were cast, the magic stones inside the devices will last for ages, meaning that remote villages can stay protected without breaking the bank on expensive resources. The Demon Lord is beyond pleased with the innovation that Danusk and Sylphid managed to pull off. The Demon Lord issues a direct order. He wants both of them to oversee the production of these magic devices so they can be distributed to every village in need. A short while later, Danusk catches up with Sylphid to personally thank her for all the help she's given him, because there's no way he could have pulled this off alone. Sylphid, in turn, expresses her gratitude as well. Thanks to Danusk, she's rediscovered her passion for research and remembered that her work actually matters. She's doing this to help people. She's truly appreciative, so she tells him that if he ever needs anything, he shouldn't hesitate to come find her. Before she heads off, she hands him a special magic device that she made just for him. The standard models max out at 10 spells, but this one can handle at least 30. So if he ever finds himself in a tight spot, this should help him survive. Danusk returns to his office feeling more motivated than ever to power through his stack of paperwork. But before he can even pick up a pen, Omandra bursts in and immediately knocks him unconscious. Turns out, she just found out about his research project with Sylphid. And she feels horrible for assuming he was flirting behind her back after he'd already proposed to her. She wanted to apologize, but now that he's lying unconscious on the floor, she has a way bigger concern on her hands. She rushes to his side, desperately trying to wake him up. Later on, Danusk invites Almandra out to do some shopping. Almandra is so flustered about this that she runs straight to Ayulu to ask for advice. Because, obviously, if he's asking her to go shopping with him, there's only one possible reason. This is definitely a date. And since it's a date, she has no choice but to pull out her secret weapon. She's planning to show up in just a bikini. After all, if she flaunts as much of her figure as possible, Danusk won't be able to take his eyes off her. Ayulu, however, is not on board with this plan. Danusk definitely isn't the type to be comfortable with that much skin on display, so she suggests wearing something a little more conservative. Almandra listens to her advice, and it definitely pays off. Unfortunately, she seems to have forgotten one crucial detail. This is Danusk we're talking about, and the only reason he asked her to come shopping with him was because he needed to research the market. The second she realizes this isn't a date, Almandra is absolutely seething. But even though she's burning with frustration, she still wants to help him out. Curious, she asks what exactly he's researching. Danusk explains that getting insights from the locals is always a smart move. It gives him new perspectives and might even help him find ways to improve the demon army. But for now, he says, he just wants to take in the sights with Almandra. That statement completely throws her off guard. But still, he insists, this is not a date. As they browse through the market, they stop by a stall where the owner just so happens to recognize Danusk as one of the elite generals of the demon army. Danusk is caught off guard. He didn't expect to be that well known. But apparently, rumors have been spreading about a human personally summoned by the demon lord. And, of course, his suit makes him stick out like a sore thumb. The merchant also recognizes Almandra, and seeing the two of them together, he naturally assumes they're on a date. Almandra immediately shuts that down. Danusk already made it very clear that this whole trip is work-related. She explains that they're conducting market research. So the merchant, eager to impress, offers to show them some of his best products. He proudly presents a pair of pure gold ornaments, explaining that it's not every day his shop gets visited by army generals. As a special deal, he even offers them a discount if they purchase a matching set of cups. He explains that these cups are traditionally bought as gifts for newlywed couples. Without a moment's hesitation, Danusk immediately says he wants to buy them for himself and Almandra. Now Almandra is getting serious mixed signals, because this really seems like Danusk is trying to flirt with her. Except he isn't. He just bought the cups and moved right along to gather intel from the shopkeeper. Once again, Almandra is left disappointed. After gathering some more data, Danusk finally sits down with Almandra over a cup of coffee to analyze the results of their research. From what he's gathered, the recent alliances with the demi-human territories have been very well received. Different cultures are mixing together, and overall, integration is going smoothly. However, there are some unexpected downsides. The biggest issue? A massive population increase has led to an unprecedented food shortage, and the prices of staple crops, particularly jam, have skyrocketed to the point that regular people can't afford them. Almandra had already noticed the rising prices, so she decided to storm into one of the food retailers and demand an explanation. Even as she aggressively shook him, the shopkeeper insisted that he can't lower his prices. If he did, he'd go bankrupt. It's clear that jam is being intentionally overpriced. But if the retailers aren't responsible for the price gouging,
then the real culprits must be the wholesalers.
However, at that exact moment, a messenger from the Golden Country bursts into the room, breathless with urgency, to deliver an unexpected update. The Golden King, thoroughly impressed by the Rosmarins, has decided he wants even more. That initial order of 200? It's been bumped up to a solid 300 now. So, with an intense round of labor and plenty of overtime, the production team grinds away until they manage to finish all 300 units within the given 3-week deadline. At last, with the quota met, Danusk can finally breathe a sigh of relief. Ottalu commends him on successfully fulfilling the order, but speaking of which, she's been meaning to ask, just how much did he sell those Rosmarins for? Danusk casually reveals that he managed to get the Golden King to fork over 50,000 bucks per Rosmarine, with the total order reaching 300 units. That stacks up to a jaw-dropping 150 million. Hottie is absolutely floored by the revelation. They actually pulled it off, convincing the Golden King to pay that much? It's downright unbelievable. But the key to their success was Danusk's carefully crafted psychological maneuver. Since the devices are still a mystery to most, he had the advantage of setting the price however he pleased. To establish the Rosmarine's worth, they strategically presented the Golden King with some high-end gifts first, specifically, silverware. The goal? To provoke the king's frustration. Even if he dismissed the silverware in a fit of disdain, he would still subconsciously acknowledge that they held genuine value. So, when Danusk finally unveiled the Rosmarine, its perceived worth shot through the roof. Alyalu is absolutely taken aback. She had no idea Danusk was capable of such cunning tactics, and she can't help but be impressed. She asks if he had anticipated receiving such a massive order from the Golden King, but he admits that part was an unexpected twist. He's just relieved they managed to complete the production in time. However, before he can even relax, the very same Golden Country messenger rushes back in, because, of course, there's more. The Golden King now wants an additional 100 units. Danusk immediately gets a vivid mental image of just how furious Sylphid is going to be when she hears about this new demand. Bracing himself for the inevitable, he trudges downstairs, fully prepared to grovel for her cooperation in order to make it happen. Sylphid, as expected, is not amused. However, after a bit of persuading, she reluctantly agrees to do what's necessary to complete the additional order. To make it happen, she brings in extra workers and quickly trains them on how to produce the Rosmarins. With the newly expanded workforce, progress on the final 100 units moves along at a steady pace, bringing them closer to their goal. Now, all that remains is the delivery. Given their continuous usage, the Rosmarins are expected to last for about a month, meaning the Golden King will have no choice but to keep purchasing from the demon army indefinitely. And with that, Danusk's mission is an undeniable success. However, just as he was beginning to unwind, Alyalu bursts into his office, looking frantic. She blurts out that the Golden King has just canceled the entire order. Danusk stares at her in disbelief, practically begging her to tell him she's joking, but unfortunately, she's not. It's the cold, hard truth. The Golden Cane pulled the plug on the entire deal after receiving only the first 100 units. They already burned through a significant chunk of the demon army's budget securing the raw materials for the Rosmarins. As a direct result, drastic budget cuts have to be made. The demi-human forces are left without their expected weapon shipment, and now the merchants are beginning to question whether they should start looking for business opportunities in another country. Danusk is left scratching his head, trying to figure out where exactly this deal went south. He worries that he might have unknowingly offended the Golden King, but something else is gnawing at him. How is there already a Rosmarine knockoff circulating on the market? Regardless of the cause, the damage is done. The demon army's funds have taken a nosedive, and morale is at rock bottom. Danusk feels personally responsible for the entire fiasco, so he decides to own up to his mistake. He makes his way to the Demon King's chambers and confesses that this whole disaster is on him. The Demon King, However, simply asks why Dnusk believes he's at fault. Dnusk explains that he was fully aware of how egotistical and impatient the Golden King was. But in his excitement over the successful negotiations, he completely overlooked the potential risks. He admits his failure and states that he's willing to accept whatever punishment the Demon King deems necessary. But the Demon King has no intention of reprimanding him. He reminds Dnusk that no one is immune to failure, no matter how meticulously one plans. Sometimes things simply go sideways. He doesn't hold Dnusk responsible for the outcome. What matters now is that Dnusk learns from the experience and uses it to grow stronger. Taking the Demon King's words to heart, Dnusk exits the throne room with newfound determination. The first thing on his agenda is to personally apologize to those who were affected by this blunder. His first stop is the troops under Gnome, who suffered budget cuts. But before he can even seek them out, he runs into Gnome herself at the bottom of the staircase. To his surprise, she doesn't appear upset with him at all. Relieved, he moves on to his next destination, Sylphid's room, hoping to apologize to her as well. However, before he can even get the words out, she waves him off and says she's just happy that she finally gets a break now that there are no more orders to fulfill. Dnusk is grateful that she harbors no resentment, and after leaving her room, he begins mentally compiling a list of anyone else he might need to apologize to. But before he can take another step, something completely unexpected happens. He is suddenly stuffed into a sack and dragged away. He assumes this must be the work of someone seeking revenge for all the chaos he's caused. So the moment he manages to wriggle free from the sack, he immediately starts spewing apologies. However, to his surprise, the one who kidnapped him isn't some vengeful enemy, it's Omandra. And she isn't here to exact retribution. She just wanted to share some meat with him. The two settle down together, and Dnusk, still a bit bewildered, asks if this is her way of trying to cheer him up. Flustered, Omandra hesitates for a moment before admitting that, yes, that's exactly what she's trying to do. Dnusk expresses his gratitude for her kindness. Omandra realizes this might just be the perfect opportunity to get a little closer to him. Slowly but surely, she starts inching toward him, closing the gap. But before she can make her move, Alyulu suddenly appears behind them, causing Omandra to instinctively pull away. It turns out Alyulu had only come by to offer them some fruit, but as she approaches, she picks up on the atmosphere and realizes she may have just walked in on something. Later that night, both Alyulu and Omandra end up dozing off. Dnusk carefully drapes a cover over them to keep them from catching a chill. As he watches them sleep, he reflects on how fortunate he is to have such supportive comrades. Instead of condemning him for his failure, they've gone out of their way to lift his spirits. With that in mind, Dnusk resolves to do everything in his power to ensure the demon army bounces back from this setback. Meanwhile, in the Golden Kingdom, the Golden King finalizes his deal for the cheaper Rosmarins. Since these new versions are just as effective as the originals, but cost only half the price, he had no reason to hesitate in switching suppliers. However, he can't help but wonder, how exactly did Butegallion manage to get his hands on the Rosmarins? When he presses for details, Butegallion simply smiles and calls it a trade secret. But that grin of his says it all. He definitely pulled something shady to make this happen. Back in the demon army, Dnusk, having come to terms with the situation, shifts his focus to developing countermeasures. The first step, figuring out how these knockoff Rosmarins flooded the market so quickly. The counterfeits supposedly popped up in less than a month, but something about it just doesn't add up, and Dnusk can't shake the feeling that there's more to this than meets the eye. Since it would take an absurd amount of time for someone to completely reverse engineer the Rosmarins and figure out how to recreate them, there's only one logical explanation. Someone must have sold off the Rosmarins that were originally obtained from the demon army without authorization. The demon army had distributed the Rosmarins throughout the nation, but only in regions that regularly suffered from brutal monster attacks. Just then, Omandra bursts into Dnusk's office, looking alarmed. She informs him that reports are coming in. The Rosmarins distributed within the kingdom are supposedly failing to function. Now, on top of everything else, he's got yet another major problem on his hands. Wasting no time, he and Omandra set out for one of the villages that filed a complaint about the ineffective Rosmarins. But when they arrive, the situation is far worse than expected. The entire village has been ravaged by magical beasts. The village chief is just as baffled as Dnusk. The Rosmarins were supposed to ward off all magical creatures. So how could this have happened? Determined to get to the bottom of this, Dnusk begins digging in the ground where the Rosmarins were originally buried, checking to see if there's an issue with the device itself. That's when he uncovers a massive problem. There is no Rosmarine. With growing concern, he and the others rush to check every single location where the Rosmarins were supposed to be hidden. Sure enough, all of them are gone. Every last one has vanished from its designated spot. This shocking discovery leads Dnusk to a grim realization. Someone is stealing the Rosmarins. However, before he makes any rash decisions, he needs solid proof. To confirm his suspicions, he enlists Omandra's help in mapping out all the villages that have reported missing Rosmarins. After carefully planning their next move, Dnusk and Omandra head out late at night, determined to conduct a thorough investigation and uncover the truth behind the stolen devices. However, Omandra is confused as to why they chose this particular village, given that no complaints had come from here. Before she can question it further, Dnusk spots movement out in the field. Without hesitation, he signals for her to stay silent as they crouch behind a tree, keeping themselves hidden. They watch as two suspicious figures dart across the field, eventually stopping to unearth one of the Rosmarins from the ground. Just as the thieves prepare to make their getaway, Dnusk and Omandra step out and confront them. This is exactly what Dnusk had suspected all along, and now he finally understands how the counterfeits managed to hit the market with the same level of quality. The mastermind behind this operation can afford to sell them dirt cheap while still raking in a massive profit. Dnusk wastes no time demanding answers, ordering the thieves to reveal who they're working for. However, the two criminals show no intention of cooperating. Instead of answering, one of them suddenly lunges at Dnusk, claws extended, aiming straight for him. Before the attack can land, Omandra swiftly steps in and takes the assailant down with a single, well-placed strike. The second thief, seeing his partner incapacitated, decides to make a move as well, but he barely gets the chance before Omandra sends him crashing to the ground too. Realizing they're hopelessly outmatched, the two criminals abandon all thoughts of fighting and instead turn on their heels, sprinting away in a desperate attempt to escape. Omandra is about to give chase, determined not to let them slip away, but before she can take off, Denosk stops her. With a calm but knowing smirk, he tells her there's no need to pursue them. Metaphorically speaking, the next day, Budagallion takes possession of the stolen Rosmarins and, just as planned, presents them to the Golden King as per his request. The Golden King is absolutely delighted with Budagallion's efforts. After all, he managed to provide a product just as effective as the demon armies, yet at only half the cost. Even more impressive, he somehow managed to produce dozens of Rosmarins in a single night, a feat that should be physically impossible. But the Golden King isn't the type to overthink such details. Instead, he showers Budagallion with praise, commending him for his skill as a merchant. Budagallion graciously accepts the compliments, basking in the recognition. After all, he takes great pride in his ability to satisfy his clients, by any means necessary. If it wasn't obvious by now, Budagallion is an extremely wealthy merchant, but calling him an honest one would be a stretch. His fortune wasn't built on fair trade alone. Rather, he amassed his wealth by purchasing goods for next to nothing and reselling them at ridiculously high prices. In theory, that wouldn't be the worst thing, but the shady methods he employs to conduct his business are another story entirely. The moment he caught wind of the Rampage Kingdom striking a deal with the demon army, Budagallion instantly saw it as a golden opportunity to make a quick fortune. Wasting no time, he acquired one of the Rosmarins and handed it over to his craftsmen, hoping they could reverse engineer it so he could start producing his own version. Unfortunately for him, his craftsmen soon reported that the device was far too complex to replicate. Of course, Budagallion wasn't about to let that minor inconvenience stop him. If he couldn't make his own Rosmarins, he'd simply go for the next best option, stealing them straight from the demon army. Naturally, his actions were not only highly illegal, but also completely unethical. However, none of that mattered to Budagallion. As long as he was making gold, he didn't care what lines he had to cross. After successfully swindling the Golden King, Budagallion departs from the Rampage Kingdom with a cart overflowing with gold. And, just a few days later, he returns once more, armed with yet another batch of stolen Rosmarins, ready to make another sale. But to his utter shock, as he nears the castle gates, he is suddenly halted by the guards. They inform him that the Golden King has issued an order for his arrest, and before he can even protest, they seize him and escort him straight to the throne room. Budagallion is completely baffled, demanding to know why he was dragged here against his will. In response, the Golden King casually picks up one of the Rosmarins Budagallion sold him during his last visit and effortlessly crushes it in his hand. The reason? It's a counterfeit. Every single Rosmarine that Budagallion delivered this time around is nothing but a worthless fake. And now, the king wants answers. Budagallion is in complete disbelief. He desperately insists that there must be some sort of mistake. After all, he would never dare to swindle a man as powerful as the Golden King. But unfortunately for him, the king's patience is thinner than my remaining strands of hair. No amount of smooth talking is going to get Budagallion out of this one. And to make his situation even worse, there's another person present who has something to say. From the shadows, Denosk steps forward and formally introduces himself. At that moment, Budagallion's anxiety skyrockets. He has heard all the terrifying rumors about Denosk, the infamous demon army general, and none of them bring him any comfort. It is said that Denosk possesses the kind of power that even mighty minotaurs and other formidable demi-humans are forced to acknowledge. In just a few short months, he has accomplished feats that others couldn't dream of achieving in a lifetime. Without a doubt, he is the most fearsome figure in the entire demon army, and Budagallion dreads what he might have planned for him. Denosk wastes no time, cutting straight to the point. He explains that there has been an ongoing issue with the demon army's Rosmarins mysteriously disappearing, and all evidence suggests that Budagallion is the one orchestrating the thefts. That is precisely why, to put an end to this criminal scheme, Denosk had something special prepared, an exact replica of the Rosmarine. Visually, this fake Rosmarine is indistinguishable from the real thing. But there's just one little detail: it doesn't actually do anything. The craftsmanship of the replicas was so impeccable that even the Golden King himself couldn't distinguish them from the real ones, and Denosk owed that success entirely to Sylphid. Once he realized that Rosmarins were being stolen, he immediately sought her help in crafting near-perfect fakes. At first, Sylphid outright refused, pointing out that creating convincing counterfeits would require a ridiculous amount of effort. But after seeing just how desperate Denosk was, she begrudgingly agreed. Once Sylphid finished manufacturing the fake Rosmarins, Denosk analyzed the village map to predict where the thieves would strike next and set up a trap in advance. Sure enough, just as expected, the thief showed up and snatched the bait. But the truly baffling part? Budagallion somehow ended up in possession of those very same fake Rosmarins. At that moment, Budagallion realizes he is catastrophically screwed. This entire situation was a setup, meticulously orchestrated by Denosk to expose him, and worst of all, it's happening right in front of the Golden King. There's absolutely no way out of this mess. No matter how he spins it, his chances of survival are looking painfully slim. With no options left, Budagallion resorts to his last desperate tactic, groveling. He throws himself at the king's mercy, apologizing profusely for his crimes. He insists that he only stole the Rosmarins to ensure the king got the best deal possible and totally didn't realize that what he was doing was wrong. Even he knows how absurd that excuse sounds, but at this point, he's willing to say anything if it means sparing his life. Unfortunately for him, mercy is not one of the Golden King's defining qualities. Without hesitation, the king coldly declares that Budagallion is to be executed. Summoning his power, the king conjures a cage of crackling lightning around the condemned merchant. Then, in a final act of ruthless efficiency, he drops one of his prized gators from the ceiling, ready to enjoy a well-earned midday snack. Budagallion shrieks in terror as the ravenous gator inches closer, its sharp teeth glinting in the light. He frantically scrambles to escape, but the electrified cage leaves him with nowhere to run. As panic tightens its grip, the grim reality of his fate sets in. This is where his story ends. His final thoughts aren't of his wealth or his cunning schemes, but of his children, the ones he'll never see again, the ones he'll no longer be able to provide for. Just as the gator is about to snap its jaws around him, a sudden blast of fire streaks across the room. Danask, wielding his personal magic device, launches a fireball straight at the beast, halting its attack. The Golden King's fury ignites instantly. Danask had been given the privilege of presenting his case against Beautygallion, but that did not grant him the authority to meddle in royal affairs. Glaring down at him, the king demands to know if Danask is prepared to take full responsibility for his reckless interference. But Danask stands his ground. He assures the king that he didn't act without reason and asks for the opportunity to explain himself. Though still seething, the king allows him to speak, but not before unleashing his twin lightning dragons as a silent warning. Danask wastes no time getting to the point. He makes it very clear that his actions have nothing to do with compassion for Beautygallion. This isn't about saving a dishonest merchant, it's about securing the future of the Rampage Kingdom. The king scoffs at the notion that a single crooked businessman could hold such significance. But the moment Danask mentions orange powder, the king's demeanor shifts. The Rampage Kingdom was built upon the prosperity of its gold mines, but in recent years, those mines have been yielding less and less. To maintain the kingdom's wealth, they've relied on extracting every last bit of gold possible from the remaining ore. And the key to that process? Orange powder. Through the use of magic, the powder allows gold to be extracted in its purest form. And the one responsible for importing this crucial resource? None other than Beautygallion himself. Danask meets the king's gaze and states with absolute certainty, he cannot be killed. The king remains unconvinced, dismissing the idea that Beautygallion is irreplaceable. However, Danask immediately shuts that idea down. It wouldn't work. The orange powder comes from the nation of Toki, a place that has been torn apart by repeated civil wars over the resource. As a result, the Tokian government has completely restricted its export. No merchant, no matter how well connected, would be able to get their hands on it anymore. Except for one. Beautygallion blinks in surprise, wondering how Danask could possibly know this. Danask explains that he had looked into the orange powder himself not too long ago. His goal was to see if he could acquire some to help the demon army manufacture its own gold supply. But, much to his disappointment, he learned that getting access to the powder was impossible. Now, back to Beautygallion. During one of Toki's brutal civil wars, the country was on the brink of collapse. Resources were scarce, the people were starving, and every other merchant had abandoned them. But Beautygallion stayed. Even in the middle of an active war zone, he continued to trade, ensuring that supplies still flowed into the country. Because of his actions, Toki's economy managed to survive the war, and as a result, the nation, along with several others, owes him a great debt. This is why he has been granted special permission to trade certain restricted goods, including the orange powder. His business methods may be shady, and his morals highly questionable, but Danask recognizes skill when he sees it. And wiping out a merchant as uniquely positioned as Beautygallion would be an undeniable waste. Danask's reasoning is surprisingly persuasive, prompting the king to dismiss his twin lightning dragons. However, he still doesn't quite grasp why Danask is so invested in this. Even if Beautygallion were to be executed and the Rampage Kingdom were to crumble, it would have no impact on the demon army. Besides, Beautygallion blatantly stole from them, making him a liability. But Danask, tilting his head in confusion, doesn't understand why the king is overcomplicating things. If someone is in trouble, isn't it only natural to help them? Both the king and Beautygallion stare at him in disbelief. The sheer innocence of his words is so unexpected that the king bursts into laughter, shaking with amusement. His entire mood does a complete 180, and after laughing to his heart's content, he decides to let Beautygallion go before heading off for a well-deserved nap. With that, both Danask and Beautygallion are promptly booted from the throne room. But hey, at least they're both alive. Beautygallion, still skeptical of Danask, assumes this was all part of some grand scheme. No ordinary man could have made the Golden King laugh like that. But in reality, Danask had been internally panicking the entire time, and now that the tension is gone, his legs have completely given out on him. He's practically wobbling like a newborn deer. Seeing this, Beautygallion begrudgingly offers him support, helping him walk as they head for the exit. However, before they can leave, they're stopped by Alyalu, who arrives with a group of thieves, the very same ones who had been stealing the Rosmarins for Beautygallion. But as it turns out, they aren't just a bunch of criminals. They're Beautygallion's daughters. The girls immediately rush over, relieved to see that their father is unharmed. They had been certain the king would punish him once everything was exposed. Beautygallion is happy to see them, but he doesn't understand why they're here. That's when Alyalu explains that Danask was the one who had her track them down. After dealing with the Komozu incident, Danask had done some digging into Beautygallion. At first, everything pointed to him being nothing more than a greedy, swindling merchant. But then Danask stumbled across something interesting. Beautygallion had taken in a number of war orphans and raised them as his own children. A man who would go that far for others couldn't be all bad. And because of that, Danask had felt compelled to protect him. Beautygallion is stunned. He never expected Danask to go to such lengths for him and his daughters. His usual smug composure cracks, replaced by genuine gratitude. Later, just before Danask prepares to leave, he offers Beautygallion a contract, one that grants him the rights to officially sell Rosmarins on behalf of the demon army. Beautygallion is floored. Why in the world would Danask entrust such an important contract to him of all people, especially after he had already deceived them once? But Danask simply smiles and says he believes Beautygallion won't try to pull anything shady again. Besides, the demon army is already overburdened with other responsibilities. They don't have the time or resources to market the Rosmarins to distant lands. That's where Beautygallion comes in. For the first time in his life, Beautygallion is truly moved by someone placing their trust in him. He vows to change his ways and swears that Danask will never regret doing business with him. Now that the deal is sealed, Danask prepares to take his leave, but just before he steps away, Beautygallion stops him with an interesting tidbit. He's caught wind of a rumor. Apparently, the guilds within demon army territory have started moving in an unusual way. Later, Danask and Omandra find themselves before the demon lord, who has called them in to address an urgent matter. The cost of food across the nation has been steadily climbing, and it's reached a point where the average citizen can barely afford a meal. The Demon Lord wastes no time assigning Danusk the task of resolving this crisis immediately. Danusk, always eager for a challenge, accepts without hesitation. He starts analyzing the situation and quickly deduces that the food prices must be soaring due to the guild monopolizing the supply. However, what baffles him is their motive. Why would they deliberately create a food shortage? Omandra, on the other hand, has a far simpler theory. The guild is just being greedy. She suggests that a direct approach might be best. March in there, knock some sense into the guild officials, and force them to fix the problem. But Danusk isn't convinced brute force alone will be enough to tackle this issue. Before he can dwell on it further, the Demon Lord dismisses him, granting him permission to leave and begin investigating. However, he has a separate task for Omandra, one that requires her to head up north. Though Danusk still hasn't figured out why the guild is manipulating food prices to such an extreme, he knows that getting answers will require him to meet with the guild master in person. A few days later, the scheduled meeting finally arrives. Danusk gathers his things and gets ready to leave, but just as he steps out, he's stopped by Sylphid, only she looks completely different than usual. Surprised, he asks why she's dressed like that. Sylphid coolly replies that she's coming along with him to the guild, but while she's wearing this outfit, she wants him to call her Belinda. It turns out that a certain clan of elves holds officer positions within the guild, and something about that makes her presence in this meeting all the more necessary. So she figured that having an elf with him might make things smoother during the negotiations. Danusk appreciates the sentiment but reassures her that it won't be necessary. However, when they finally arrive at the guild, things unfold exactly as Belinda feared. Rather than being greeted promptly, they are left waiting. And not just for a little while, for whole hours pass before the guild master finally bothers to show up. When he does, the man known as Viper barely acknowledges them. With a casual shrug, he simply says he forgot they were there, completely unfazed by the absurdly long wait time he just put them through. Danusk, for the sake of diplomacy, decides to let it slide. But Belinda? Not a chance. She gets right in Viper's face, and now that they're up close, recognition flashes across his features. He knows exactly who she is. That's because they're siblings. It's been years since Belinda last saw Viper, and frankly, she would have been perfectly happy if that number had kept going up indefinitely. But here they are. Since there's no avoiding it, she pushes her feelings aside and informs him that Danusk has business to discuss. Danusk, still processing the fact that Belinda and Viper are related, decides to set that particular revelation aside for now. He gets straight to the point. He needs to purchase grain from the guild because the current food supply is critically low. Viper, ever the snake, feigns ignorance about the situation. However, he then smirks and tells Danusk that if he really wants the guild to sell food to the demon army, there's one thing he'll have to do first: get on his knees and beg for it. Most people with a shred of dignity would refuse outright. But Danusk? Without a second thought, he immediately drops to his knees and starts pleading. Viper is caught completely off guard. He never actually expected Danusk to go through with it. The sight of it is so bizarrely entertaining that he can't help but laugh. Amused by the sheer absurdity of the situation, he decides to back off and apologizes for taking the joke too far. With that, he agrees to sell Danusk the food. However, the price he's asking is outright robbery, 50,000 gold for a single bag of gem. It's beyond unreasonable. But Viper just shrugs and tells them that if they don't like the price, they're free to take their business elsewhere. With that, he turns to leave. Before walking away completely, though, he pauses to offer Danusk some unsolicited advice. He tells him that he's far too reckless with his pride. Throwing himself on the ground like that in front of others will only turn him into a laughingstock. Then, without another word, he walks off, leaving Danusk and Belinda with no choice but to exit the guild empty-handed. Once they're outside, Belinda is still seething. She outright suggests burning the entire guild, and Viper along with it, to the ground. Danusk, however, feels that might be taking things a bit too far. Belinda, on the other hand, doesn't understand how he can be so calm after being publicly humiliated for no reason. But Danusk? He's long past the point of caring about things like that. Getting down on his knees isn't enough to damage his pride anymore. It was stomped into the dirt years ago. Honestly, he's still more shocked about the fact that the guild master turned out to be Sylphid's younger brother. Sylphid decides that now is as good a time as any to give him the full story. She explains that she was born into a family of elven merchants, but since elves have difficulty reproducing, it's common for them to mix with other species. Sylphid herself is half elf, half fairy, while Viper is half elf, half lizard. Because of these mixed bloodlines, some children develop an unhealthy fixation on acquiring wealth and status, an obsession that drove them to horrific extremes. They even went as far as burning down their own elf village and selling their own kin into slavery just to make a profit. Disgusted by their actions, Sylphid abandoned the Lord Pint family and cut all ties with them. Ever since, she's wanted nothing to do with them. But now that she knows her degenerate brother is tangled up with the guild, there's no way she can turn a blind eye. Danusk understands her frustration, but he wishes she could have at least let him try to talk things out before jumping straight to an argument. That aside, Sylphid asks him what his next move is since there's no way they can afford Viper's absurd price. Danusk racks his brain, trying to come up with a strategy, but before he can settle on one, a small girl suddenly approaches him. She looks up at him with desperate eyes and pleads for his help. She wants to escape from the Lord Pint family. Her name is Nia, and she explains that she's being forced to work for them against her will. She wants Danusk's help in exposing their corruption. Danusk studies the girl for a moment, considering his options. Then, after a long pause, he nods. He'll help her. Partly because her story is troubling. Mostly because she's adorable. But before anything else, he decides the first order of business is getting her some proper clothes. Danusk takes Nia to a shop and picks out a purple dress for her. It's clear he's enjoying himself, but Sylphid is beginning to develop some serious doubts about his preferences. She eyes him suspiciously, wondering if he has an unhealthy interest in little girls. Moving on from that uncomfortable thought, Danusk asks Nia if she's willing to act as a whistleblower against the Lord Pint family. She doesn't hesitate to confirm that she is, so Danusk decides to take her to a restaurant where they can talk in detail. As they sit down and eat, Nia begins recounting her story. She explains that the Lord Pint family tore her away from her real family and forced her to work under the guildmaster. Unfortunately, she isn't the only one in this situation. Many others like her are being exploited, forced to labor for practically nothing in return. It's undeniably awful, but Danusk asks if she has any additional information that could help him. Nia nods and tells him about a rumor spreading through town, whispers of an impending calamity that will make food even harder to come by. However, the kicker is that these rumors aren't organic. The guild itself is responsible for spreading them, deliberately stoking fear among the people so they can jack up food prices without protest. Additionally, the guild has been buying up massive amounts of gym grain, hoarding it, and restricting access to drive the price even higher. It's a textbook case of market manipulation. On paper, this should be damning evidence, enough to topple the entire operation. But there's one problem. The majority of the guild officers hail from the Lord Pint family, and the few who aren't have all been thoroughly bribed into silence. As a result, no one has dared to take action against them.